Hi guys, this is Val. I am here to tell you my part two or episode two of the spiritual world of things I've seen and experienced, and just so I can help you get rid of these things, eventually teach you all the things that I've learned through all my experiences. I think last time we were still when I was a little kid, and so now I kind of like want to go on to a little bit of a teenager, so I remember telling that I had a friend, you'll know, and if you didn't hear the last video, you might want to watch the last video because it's kind of like a story time timeline kind of thing. So I remember I was telling you about when we moved in a house, and my friend was painting with me, and we saw that little girl in the hallway. Well, that girl's going to have a part in my story, so we're just going to name her Annie. Okay, so I just want to let you know for that. So, and where we left off, my home was a Christian home. Um, there are a lot of things I think could have happened to me that didn't because I had a praying mother. I had a mother that she was one of them moms that used to go around anointing things in oil, and she would be screaming and yelling in the name of Jesus, that kind of thing. And as a teenager and a young kid, I just thought, okay, mom, that's weird, but it helped. It helped a lot. So I'll just go back to some of my church stuff. The church we went to, well, my grandparents' church was a Methodist church, and I remember it was this huge old church, and it had red carpet. And I remember my grandmother was in the choir, so I always, as a little kid, wanted to go to choir practice with them. And I would just pretty much run around the church, like, just being a kid. And it was weird because that church was so creepy. Um, I remember I would go to the bathroom. It would take me forever because I would go in the hallway, and in order to get to the bathroom, you had to walk through like this little closet kind of coat check kind of area. And I would go in the bathroom, and I would be terrified because I would hear things scratching on the door and on the walls, and I'd be afraid to leave the bathroom. So a lot of times I would sit in the bathroom until my grandpa came to get me, and then I'd get in trouble for being gone too long. So things like that happened, and then the church that my mom began going to, it was a Pentecostal charismatic type church. So we were meeting in a middle school before our building was built, and we weren't supposed to go. It was in the kitchen of the school, like the lunchroom, but we weren't supposed to go outside of that area, away from the bathrooms, and the lunchroom was kind of like where we were allowed to go. But me and my friends, we just kind of wanted to run through all the hallways and, do all this kind of stuff. And so I remember one time I decided to walk through the halls by myself. And I remember walking through the hallways, and I always felt like there was that thing looking at you again. I always felt like I was being followed and looked at. And so I remember walking through the hallways, and I stopped. I got this weird feeling. I stopped at this one room, and I looked at the room, and you got to figure all the lights were out, so it's dark. And I'm thinking I'm being adventurous walking through the hallways. I go past this one room, and I look in the room, and there's this thing. It's like a shadow, and it's wispy, and it's going in between all the chairs. It's just kind of flying around the room. It looked like I don't know if anybody has watched Harry Potter, but it looked like the Dementors. Those black things. I mean, they didn't come and try to suck your air out of your lungs, but it looked like those. And I believe those things are real because I've seen them a few times in my life, and I saw that and I ran back. And I don't think I went walking through the hallways very much anymore, but once we got our church building built, because they were building a building, that was kind of my church home for years and years and years growing up. And in my house, if you didn't go to church, I wasn't allowed to live in my house. It was a requirement to go to church. So I remember, I mean, there were lots of situations in that church. I know one time, um, I was sitting, I used to, of course, sit in the back, because I was getting teenage and, I was just, in my head, I really didn't want to be there, but I knew I had to be there. And, I had went through all the giving your life to God and the sinner's prayer and the, getting baptized. But it was kind of more like I didn't do it because I really wanted to do it. I wanted to do it because all my friends were doing it. It wasn't for the right reasons. So I had went through all that, and I remember one time we were sitting there, and we all kind of would try to sit in the back together, and there was this guy that was sitting maybe a row and maybe 2 rows, I think, kind of diagonal from me. And right in the middle of church, right, this was possessed because right in the middle of church, he jumps up and he starts growling and he runs over and he runs into the wall and he's just screaming and yelling, and it did not sound like his voice. I had heard that guy talk before. It sounded evil. Like it was just raspy and creepy. And a bunch of the church men grabbed this guy by his arms and was dragging him out into the hallway. Well, I get up and I'm standing kind of like in the back of the church where there's no seating, but I'm just kind of watching what they're doing, and they're all praying over this guy. Okay, he's laying on his stomach. They've got him on his stomach, and he's tripping. Like, he's just flailing and moving and spitting from the mouth. I mean, he was growling. I mean, it was actually really scary. So I remember I'm sitting there watching, and he's on his stomach, and people are praying over him and everything. And I don't know if you guys have been in many churches or, maybe old buildings where they have, it looks like a dining table, but they're really big. And they're super, super heavy. They're like really old. And it would take about 6 men to carry this table through the church. And this guy is laying on his stomach, and he is screaming and yelling and just cussing and growling and spitting, and this guy's flailing, and he reaches over and grabs one of the legs of that table, and he lifted that table. And by then I was done. I was like, nah, nope, 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 nope. And I went over and I sat with my friends because I was like, yeah. And they shut the church doors, and when he came back in, he was completely normal, like nothing had happened. So that was weird. And they said, he went through deliverance. And that's pretty much in the regular church, not Catholic churches, but in regular churches, they will say it's a deliverance when it's actually what people will call an exorcism. So that's what had happened. And I could hear him yelling, like before he came back, I could hear him yelling and screaming and cussing and puking, and it was all this nasty stuff. And I heard that. And so it was creepy, And my mom, she cleaned the church. She had a cleaning job, and we would do that on the weekends, and like maybe Friday, Saturday, I think. I can't really remember, but I think it was like Saturday. But and I would go into the sanctuary, and I didn't know how to play any of the instruments, but I would just take her with instruments. Like I would sit there, play the piano and play with the drums, and the lights were always off in there. And one day I was sitting in there, and I got that weird feeling, and I looked up, and I saw this thing. It was really big, and it was shaped like a bear, but it was like a bear that was extra muscular with no hair. And it was walking up and down the aisles, and it was freaky. And so I just kind of sat there and watched it. It didn't really look at me. It didn't do anything. It was just kind of moseying around with and I jumped up and I ran out of the church, like out of the sanctuary part of the church. And I didn't go back in there until Sunday, or alone ever again. But I remember seeing that thing walking. It was huge, and its teeth were all pointy. It had like a fiery red eyes. His eyes had like a red tint, like a burgundy type of tint, and that's what it looked like. And I never knew what it was until years later, the only thing that I could put that with was I found out that our pastor was a Mason. So there are certain spirits that are in different types of belief systems. And I believe that that was some type of Masonic spirit that was allowed in the church because of the spiritual law that he was the pastor. So whatever went with him was allowed in his church if he didn't, pray it off. So, or repent of it. So I believe that's what that had to do with. Yeah, so I'm having those regular occurrences still. And then this comes into where my friend, the girl that we'll call Annie, I started hanging out with her all the time. She was just my best friend, and it seemed like she was one of those friends where you didn't even have to speak. You both just knew what each other was thinking. So that's why she became my best friend. She was great. And she really liked the dark stuff too, and I can't say I liked it. I'm just saying it was like, we had that in common. She liked stuff like that, and that kind of stuff happened to me, so we kind of meshed. And so this is when I start dabbling, and I start doing things that I probably shouldn't have done, but I got this draw at this time. I was probably about 13, 14, and I started getting this draw to dark things. I always wanted to, it was like I wanted this glutton for punishment. Like I wanted to watch horror movies. I wanted things that were dark. I wanted to go ghost hunting. I wanted to find answers. I wanted to know what was going on. And I mean, even throughout my life, I always knew that there was a God. I always believed in Jesus. I always, but at the same time, I wasn't living right. I wasn't living for Jesus, even though I believed in Jesus. I just didn't. It's like I wasn't ready. I felt like I needed to search things out first, and that was kind of the worst thing I could have done. But me and Annie started doing things like Ouija boards. Her house was haunted. I mean, every house she had ever lived in seemed to be haunted. We were doing Ouija boards. We were doing the spirit, this ghost hunting type stuff. We did psychic readings. We had psychics come and do readings on us, and I was just dabbling, and every time we would have movies, we had to have scary movies. We had to have, I had this pull to darkness. I mean, even with things like, drinking, I was the first one to grab the alcohol. I was the first one to try to get into trouble. I was the first one to try to destroy myself, pretty much. And I started getting that draw, it was like a drug, it was like I had to do it, and I was just getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And we would have weird things, I mean, she had this creepy little clown doll, and this clown, she would put it way in the back of her closet, and something would throw it out of her closet. I mean, things like this would happen all the time, and I believe she had an aunt that was a psychic medium or something like that too. So it was in her bloodline too. So we turned it into a game. Let's see how long it takes for it to fly out of the closet. So we put it way in the closet and wait for it to come flying back out. And I started getting to where it didn't really bother me. I was getting a little, what's the word, jaded or something. I don't know. I was just getting used to it. Something always happened, it seemed like. Even with my cousins, I had two cousins that were girls that are sisters, and this is when I started hearing things tell me things. And for example, and it would be things that just had nothing to do with anything. We were sitting, they had a little living room set up in their basement, and I'm sitting on the couch, and I hear this whisper. It wasn't really a whisper, it's like an inside knowing, and it said to me, "Those flowers are about to fly out of the flower pot." And within maybe a minute, the flowers pop out of the flower pot. And I had told him, and this is where I told him, I said, "Those flowers are about to fly out of the flower pot." And they were like, "What? No, no, no." When they flew out and they popped up out of the flower pot, both my cousins went up running, screaming, and I'm just sitting there like, what? You know, because it seemed like I was getting used to things, and I would hear things like, even some years back, I'm married now, but I would be sitting with my husband, and he'd be watching a fight or something, and I would sense or hear, or however that worked. I barely remember it. I would just hear that person's gonna win the fight, and then lo and behold, that person wins the fight. So things like that, where you would have psychic abilities, or being hearing things like like how when you would go to have a psychic or somebody tell you, that's really how it works. Is they're telling you those things that they hear. So that started happening to me, and so I totally kind of like, it's like I came into agreement with this thing. I started going to the library, and I started getting books on tarot and hand reading, and any kind of supernatural, heebie-jeebie type, book or recording or anything. I started getting that pool, so I started reading this stuff, and I don't want to say I got into it, because the funny thing is I would start to read it, and then I would just lose interest, and then I would feel guilty, and I knew that it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. It seemed like I couldn't stop myself from going towards it, but it was almost like growing up as a Christian, I felt like I was straddling a fence, and one side was the Christian side, the other side was all the worldly stuff and all this demonic stuff that I was dealing with, and I felt like I didn't want to get too far from either side, you know what I mean? So it was like I would look into this stuff, but I'd never go through it. I never moved to the next, step of actually buying tarot cards, or doing it, because I felt like that was too far away from the Christian side of my fence. So I lived like that for years. So around this time, I got a boyfriend that I started dating. Let's call him John. Okay. So during this time, I was about 18 years old, and we started dating, and I dated him for maybe 5 years, 4 to 5 years. And so his house was kind of like a battleground of spiritual stuff. It was like boot camp. I mean, his house, I'd never in my life experienced stuff like I experienced is his house. Like, they told me stories, and I'll tell you some of the stories after I tell you the things that happened to me. Was, they told me, well, actually, no, I'll just tell the stories now. They told me that their grandmother, which was the great-grandmother, lived on one side of the house. It was a duplex, and him and his grandparents lived on one side, and I ended up moving in there for a while, and I lived on the other side, which was his aunt and his cousins, and you could go through the attic and be on either side of the house. So there was a doorway on either side of the house where you could just go back and forth. So the first story they told me was everything, or most of the things that were really freaky, happened on the side that I was staying on, which is with his aunt and his cousins. They said that his great-grandmother lived there, and she was in a home when I knew him. And she would lay in bed, and she'd cuss these things out at night. And one night she was laying in bed, and she was telling her to leave her alone, and, bleep, 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 and, she's gone off. And she felt air fly past her face, and something hit her headboard and shattered it. And it was a solid wood headboard. So, and you could see the indentation of a fist that hit the headboard. And they took me upstairs. They said they still had it in the attic, and they took me upstairs and they showed me. And it was a fist. It looked like something had took a fist and hit that thing, and the thing was like shattered, like not completely broken, but like cracked. So I believed a lot of the stories, and they told me that every night at a certain time, if you go downstairs and in the one corner, you'll hear growling. And so me being, pulled to darkness, but yet scared of it at the same time, so it was like a walking contradiction, I would go downstairs and I would listen if there's growling, and that was true. Every night you would hear growling in the corner, and I don't know why it happened every night. I don't know what the deal was, why it was like, oh, okay, 11:30, time to go start growling. I didn't know. So, but I would hear it, and it was true. And so as I lived there, we would go back and forth. Like I would come over his side, he'd come over my side, and I just stayed on my side most of the time. But when he was home, we'd go over to his, or he'd come over to mine, and stuff like that. So, and in this house, I experienced one room, the room that his great grandmother lived in, or the one that was her bedroom. That room would be cold 24/7. And the thing is they didn't have air conditioning. So even it could even be 100 degrees outside with no air conditioning. And you'd walk in that room and it was freezing cold, like ice cold. And I used to make jokes. I would say, oh my gosh, it's so hot. Can I go to the upstairs bedroom? I would go in there and sit just to cool off. But it was freezing cold. And so other things that I experienced would be they had a bathtub, not a shower. So I would go in and start the water. And I would come back in and the water would be turned off. I'd turn it back on. I'd go back to my room, getting clothes, whatever I was doing. I'd come back in, it'd be turned off. I remember hearing boots. They would go up and down the stairs and down the hallway. And it sounded like work boots. Like really heavy clump, 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 kind of, And you would hear it, but there'd be nobody there. You'd look out the hallway, nobody there. You'd look down the stairs, nobody there. You would never see anybody there. So there was that. There was another little girl, similar to the one I saw here, but this one didn't have short dark hair. She had really long dark hair. And I saw her one night. I was trying to go to sleep, and once again, I got that tingly back of your neck feeling, and I look up, and there's that little girl. And the creepiest thing was her eyes were completely black. Like, she's standing at my doorway in, that old period dress, and she's got this long, black, dark hair, and she's standing there, and I can't tell if she's looking at me because all her eyes are completely black. There's no pupil, there's no nothing. It's just black holes. And my whole life, when these things would happen, when I would pray, or I would say prayers in my head, I'd be like, oh my gosh, Jesus, help me, oh my God, I need this to go away, but please, 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 please. Usually I would fall asleep or they would go away. So it was kind of like, I used that in emergencies. You know what I mean? Like, if I got too freaked out, I would start doing that. And she would go away. So I would see her. You would hear regular footsteps, like bare feet footsteps in the house. An all in all creepy thing. I remember one night, he had slept on my side with me, and, what's his name again? John? We named him John. He was in my room, and we fell asleep, and he had to get up and go to work. So he gets up, and he starts going to the attic, and, I hear him open the attic door. I hear him walk up the steps, like normal steps. Hear step, 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 just normally walking across the floor. Then I hear boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, what is that? So I go flying out of my room, and I see him tripping down the stairs to my side. And I'm like, what happened? What's wrong? He said, there's a lady up there. This scary lady up there came and chased me back to this side of the house. And a little backstory on that, there supposedly was a lady in the attic that had killed herself years and years ago, and she hung herself from the attic. And there was a time when I first moved in where we didn't see the actual rope, but we saw a shadow of a rope, but there was no rope there. So supposedly there was this lady in the attic. I never saw the lady, but he saw her, and she started chasing him across the house. So even though he was very guyish, okay, I had to walk him to his side of the house because he was too scared to go by himself. So I walked him to his side of the attic, and I went back down my steps, and he went down his. So things like that would happen. Um, and they would happen regularly, all the time. His house was like haunted beyond haunted. It was just so creepy. And so I realized, this isn't my imagination. This is not, this is happening to everyone around me. Everybody else is telling me stories. I'm experiencing them same stories. This is real. This is not a joke. So one night, and this is the thing that actually had me run out of the house. Um, One night, his grandparents that lived on their side decided to go visit the great grandmother, and she was somewhere in Kentucky. I believe it was Kentucky or West Virginia. I can't remember. I think it was Kentucky. And his aunt, um, she was sick. She had a hospital bed, and but she was feeling better. So she and her boyfriend and her kids went camping. So my boyfriend at the time was at work and was going to be at work till about 9 p.m. He got off at 9, so he'd be home between 9 and 9:30. So I decided, it was a summer day. It was nice. I was really tired. And in her room where she had her hospital bed, it was kind of like the dining room, but she just sat her bed up in there. And there was this long couch that we used to always sit and talk to her on. We used to sit and just chat. And his aunt was cool. She was really cool. I loved her. Um, so I was sitting on that couch, and I'm like, man, I was like, I'm tired. I was like, I wonder if I could just lay here and go to sleep just for a few minutes, and then I'll get up when he gets home. So I lay down. I'm totally out, right? I'm knocked out. And I feel like there's someone hovering over me. And it wakes me up. It's so strong it wakes me up. And when I open my eyes, I see a man. He's not necessarily scary. It just looks like a man, but he's see-through and he's like a bluish white translucent, right? He's leaning an inch from my head just looking at me. And I'm just sitting there like, what? I just, like, I just woke up, so I'm totally out of it. I'm not thinking straight. I'm just staring back at him. And then he stands up, he turns around, and he starts walking up the steps. And I can hear his boots. And I'm thinking, boot guy. It's the first thing I thought because I heard boots. So he walks up the steps. And at that time, I'm terrified, but I start just adrenaline acting. I jump up. I looked up the stairs. There's no one there, but I still hear the boot steps. And by that time, for some reason, this experience scared me so bad, I ran out of the house. And I sat in the grass for like 2 hours waiting on him to come home. I was not going back in that house by myself. It was like I was one person, and there's all these freaking spirits in this house, and the only one they can mess with is me. So I am not volunteering for that. So I went outside, and I sat down in the grass, and I waited till he got home and told him what happened. But the really weird thing is that spirit looked just like his grandfather. And his grandpa and grandma were really cool too. But it looked like his grandpa, but his grandpa was still alive and he was in Kentucky. So I thought maybe that his grandpa was some kind of familiar spirit, So I'm like, what? And I'm like, and I went outside, sat in the grass. He came home. I told him about it. I can't remember what we did, but I don't know if we went somewhere or we both went. I can't remember. But that happened. So I'm dealing with it. And, it's just those things seem to happen to me. They happen to him and they happen to Annie. So I was surrounded by people who believed me and understood me. So it was almost like I was at home, but I didn't feel at home. I still felt tormented. I still felt scared. I still felt, all these things, but, what could you do, So, we broke up, me and John, and soon after, I met the guy that was going to be my husband. So, we get together. Some of this stuff slows down. I think maybe I started doing, I think I was ignoring the signs, ignoring the feelings, just refusing to acknowledge the things that were bothering me or the things that would come bother me, But the funny thing is I still slept with a light on. Like I'm, 20, 21 years old and I still sleep with a light on. And, you know, yes, that's embarrassing, but I still had that freaked out feeling all the time at night. So we got together and eventually got married 2 years later, and I started ignoring things. I just kind of thought, if this is how my life is going to be, I'm just going to ignore it because I'm sick of dealing with it. I'm sick of being afraid. I'm sick of being. But at night, I still felt like there were things that were around. I still felt like things were hovering over my bed. I still would get those chills of feeling like someone was walking past me. Like cold breezes and things like that, and I just ignored them. I I knew what they were, but I just didn't want to acknowledge it, because I was tired of dealing with it. I was still scared, but I just didn't want to acknowledge it. So at this time, my husband, he isn't a Christian. He has said the sinner's prayer. He has, done certain things, but he doesn't necessarily like going to church, like hearing about, these things. If I tell him any of the scary, creepy stuff, he tells me instantly, "Oh no, don't talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't, I'll have nightmares." So I really didn't have anywhere to turn, to talk to people, and I was no longer friends with Annie. We had a little bit of a falling out, and I didn't speak to her. Of course, I didn't speak to my ex-boyfriend because I'm married now, and so, I would sense this stuff, and I would hear, my mom would talk to me all the time about it. She would say, you need to anoint your house with oil, tell those things to get out, they're not allowed. So I was kind of in this in-between thing, like a backslidden Christian, and I wasn't living for God then either. So I was kind of living for myself, and so, that stuff happened, and then eventually, I looked at my husband, and I was like, "Hey," I said, "let's go to," there's a place it's called Cedar Point, and it's in Ohio, and on Halloween, they have this thing called Fright Night. I think it's called Fright Night. It's just a Halloween thing. And so we decided to go up there. We got a hotel and everything. And I went to sleep in the hotel that night. It was like one of those things where you are so exhausted you don't remember falling asleep. So I was that kind of tired. So I fall asleep and I wake up in the middle of the night because I feel a presence, and I look over, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but there is a guy standing there. It looks like a hillbilly boy I married a hillbilly boy, so this guy had on what I thought were boots, jeans, a flannel shirt, a baseball hat. It looked like he was carrying a can of something. I don't know if it's pop beer or what. And he's kind of bent down, like in your regular hotel rooms, you'll walk in and there'll usually be a bathroom, and then you keep walking, there'll be like two beds, one bed, whatever. Well, this hotel room had two beds, and we were in the one closest to where the window would be. So in between us we were on one bed, there was one more bed, and then there was the bathroom. So he was on the first bed. He's a little bent down, kind of looking at us from the first bed. And I laid there for a minute, and I was kind of frozen. And I started nudging my husband. And I said, hey, did you see that? And he's like, what? And so the guy turns around and he walks into the bathroom. And I said, there's a man in here. And my husband jumped up so quick. He was like ready to box. He's like, what? I was like, I saw a guy. So I said, he went in the bathroom. He goes in there and he's like, there's nobody there. And I'm like, no, I saw a man. He walked in the bathroom. And he was like, there's nobody there. So I made him, he wouldn't sleep with the light on. So I made him turn the TV on all night long and turn the volume down just so I could see my surroundings. And there were other things that happened. I went and I watched we ended up moving. My mom started doing like missionary type work. And so we moved into the house that I grew up in. And at the time we had been renting, but then we moved into this house where I live in now, where I grew up, and my family lived here, and she lives in another house with my sister. So we rent this house from her. And I had just watched that Paranormal Activity movie, and I think it was the first one. And so I'm sitting there, and things are flying off my walls. Like, I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden a wreath. Somebody had made me, the lady that made our my bouquet for our wedding, took my bouquet and made a wreath out of it so I could hang it on my wall. Well, this thing was on a hook, okay? And you know, if a wreath is on a hook, there's like 30 things that can get, caught when you're trying to get a wreath off the wall. Because it's just strand after strand after strand of that wickery type, wood or whatever. And so this wreath literally comes up and flies off the wall after I got done watching Paranormal Activity. So I'm opening doors, and I'm opening so many spiritual doors, and I've opened so many doors in my life that it was just a free-for-all. I'm still hearing things. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. Somebody's going to walk across the street. That person walks across the street. Just whatever, And some of the things I thought were pointless, and so some of the things I would hear, I'm like, yeah, whatever, it happened. I'm like, okay, So I did that for years. I ignored it. I didn't pay any attention to it. And then it started getting worse. I got to the point where my husband, he snores so bad. So now this house is a 2-bedroom house. He has a room, I have a room. Because I couldn't take it anymore. I would wake up mad and tired, and he would tell me how tired he was, and I'd want to jump up and just strangle him, and I was exhausted. So we now have 2 different rooms. So he would be asleep, I'd be asleep, and I'd hear things, and so I kind of brought all that stuff, because when you open doorways, you get attachments, you get all kinds of stuff that come and go, and so I had done that, and I hadn't closed any of them. And so we're getting to the time where I start to decide that I'm tired of being freaked out. At nighttime, I like to tell people, okay, I'm kind of out myself, but I like to tell people that I liked having curtains around my bed because it was pretty. And well, it was, but the real reason was so I could sleep at night, feel like my little curtain hut was private, and it made me feel safer. So, just for next week, just so you know that, I had, I did things like that. I wouldn't put my bed staring at the hallway, because it seemed like these spirits really love hallways. So I would make my bed across the room, so I couldn't see out the hallway at night, and so nothing could see me. I would do these kinds of things, like, kind of safe-proofing my area from being freaked out. And one more story before I get ready to set up for next week, but one story I wanted to tell you was right when I had met my husband. I was living with my mom and my sister, and I had a room in the basement, and of course, you remember that thing I told you that was always in my room? It was always hanging around in my basement. It was always there too. So I remember I'm laying in bed, and my cousin Jason, my cousin Jason had came from Florida to spend some time here with us. So he was upstairs asleep on the couch, and I was downstairs asleep in my room. And both of us heard it. Somebody yelled my name, and we both wake up. And I go upstairs, and I'm like, was that my mom? Because it was a woman's voice. I was like, is that my mom? And he goes, Did you hear that too? I said, yeah. He goes, somebody's yelling your name. All right. Fast forward 10 years, 15 years later, I don't hear that voice ever again. That doesn't ever happen to me until I go and I visit my cousin Jason. I visit him, how you doing, to kind of hang out for a while because he lived in another part of the state. So I come back and I'm sitting in my room and there's a window in front of me and that hallway is behind me. And I'm sitting there and I'm not thinking nothing of it, and that same voice, that exact same voice that said my name those years ago, said my name again standing in that hallway. And I had my back to it. It said my name. That was the exact voice. I remember it because you remember these things very clearly when you're like being traumatized. It said my name. And I sat there and I said, nope, I ain't turning around. You better go wherever you need to go because it ain't here. You need to leave. And I started praying again. And with all these things that has happened to me and this draw to darkness, and I mean, I watched these television shows about ghosts 24/7. Okay, and Halloween for me was like the best time because I could watch them every single day, all day. Hauntings, haunted this, haunted that. And one thing that I saw that was just kind of blew my mind was we had went to Key West. Sorry, it's another story. But we had went to Key West, and it was my first time ever being there. So we go to this bar, and it's got, we were hungry, and they had pizza and stuff. So we go to this bar, and it has a tree growing up in the middle of the bar. And I think it was called Captain Tony's, if I'm not, I think it was called that. And it had a tree. And I didn't think nothing of it. I just like, oh, that's cool. So we go into the bar, I get a drink, I'm eating my pizza, everything's cool, and I have to go to the bathroom. So I'm like, we'll leave here in a minute, let me go to the bathroom, and then I'll be right back out. So at this time, there would be people singing up front, or music, or live music, and you would have to go to the next room, which had pool tables, which was farther back. And in the ground, it was like there were these headstones, but they were flat. Like, it was like a concrete floor, but all of them looked like they were, these gravestones were encrusted in the floor. So I'm kind of looking at that, and then I realize it's 95 degrees outside, and I'm in Key West, and why does this back room feel like a freezer? So I'm like, okay, that's weird, so I'm like, I'm going to the bathroom. So I go in, I notice the pool tables, I go into the bathroom, and I'm sitting there doing my business, and I hear whispers. And it was the kind of whispering that sounded like it was two people having a conversation, but you couldn't tell what they were saying. And they're like, and I'm just like, whatever, and then I thought, I didn't hear the door crack, because that door's kind of loud, so I thought, how is there somebody in here that I don't know about, and I didn't hear the door crack? So, once again, I go back to ignoring. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Same day, different day, same story kind of thing. So then I'm peeking kind of through the door, and I see a woman walk past in a blue dress. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess there is somebody in here, and I'm still hearing the whispering. So I get done, I open the door, lo and behold, nobody's in there. And when I open the door, it is really loud, and it did creak loud. So I'm thinking, okay, I just saw another something, whatever that was. And the real kicker that got me was, we went, I believe it was springtime, and that following fall, around Halloween, I'm watching my ghost shows, haunted this, haunted that, paranormal evidence, and blah, blah, and I'm watching this, right, because it's like drugs to me, I gotta watch it, and so then, I'm sitting here, and they had a haunted Key West, and then they start talking about the lady in blue. I said, what? I'm kind of just looking at it like, what? They said that in this restaurant that has the tree growing in it, people report seeing a lady in blue in the bathroom and in the back of the building. And supposedly, I don't know if she had cheated on her husband or if she was a witch or what the background story is. I really can't remember because that was years ago when I heard this story. She was hung from that tree. And now people are saying that they see a lady in blue in the bathroom and in the back of the building. So I'm standing there and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my mouth is on the floor. Like, I'm like, jaw just don't hit the floor. I'm thinking, I saw the lady in blue. Like, that's what they keep talking about. And I had seen her. So once again, I felt validated. And from then on, I just kind of like, it was like I was feeding on this stuff. It was like a drug of this darkness stuff. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why. I wanted to know who this was. I wanted to know why they were bothering me. I wanted to know how to be in control of it. I wanted to know, should I join them or should I turn my back on it? Jesus says, turn your back on it. But I'm thinking, in the flesh, and I'm just like, what do I do? What do I do? And then I start getting this feeling. There's this church that's just a little ways from me, and I used to drive past it all the time. And I started getting this desire to go to this church. I kept thinking, I need to go there. And I would just ignore it, this happened for like a year. Every time I drive past there, I'm like, I need to go there. I started getting the feeling that I needed to go to this church. So that's where I'm going to leave off today. And this is when I start really healing and really, doing some things that I've never done. This is where I learned how to close doors. This is where I learned how to get rid of all these things. And this is the beginning of that. So I will tell you about how I did all that and the warfare that I went through. Some of it was really scary and creepy and ominous, but I came out on the other side and I'm so much better. So until next week, I'd appreciate if you would subscribe or like the video if you like it, and I will see you next week. God bless. Bye-bye.